Hello and welcome to this introduction to Legionnaire's disease in the tenanted property sector. My name is Giles Green and I am the chairman of the technical committee of the Water Management Society. I've been in this business for many years and as a risk assessor and controller of Legionella. So I'm going to take you through this and explain a little bit about the bacterium and how this works in terms of the landlord, the managing agent of rented properties. So first of all, we'll be looking briefly at the bacterium and the law. We'll be looking at how it can be controlled. We'll be looking at who's responsible, and we'll be looking at the problem itself, which is our friend the Legionella bacterium, whom you can see in this photograph here. So the bacteria Legionella is what causes Legionnaire's disease. It crops up everywhere. You find it in water, you find it in soil, you find it in compost, you'll even find it in tiny concentrations in mains water. Difficult to detect, arguably isn't always there, but you must assume that it will be anywhere where there is water. It comes in at harmless concentrations in the mains, but they will multiply. It's a biological agent. It will multiply from a harmless trace to a dangerous level if you give it the right conditions. Essentially, it needs something to eat, it needs to be warm enough, and it needs time. If it does grow, it will still do you no harm until it gets into your system, and the way it does is by inhaling droplets. So a shower creates a lot of spray and you will inhale a lot of bacteria. A tap creates far less and you'll inhale a lot less. And remember, these are tiny, tiny things. They're too small to see. So it's not the splash and spray you can see, it's what you can't see. It affects some people more than others. Men, strangely, are 3 times more susceptible than women. Nobody really knows why. Older people are more susceptible than young. It's very rare in children. It becomes commoner as people get older. And somewhere around about 40, 50 years of age, you become more susceptible. But there is a general increase. Then there are other factors which emerge from the statistics. Smokers are far more susceptible than non-smokers. Anybody with a heart or lung condition, diabetes, cancer, or anything which depresses the immune system makes you more susceptible. Now those people will be in the general population, but they will be in large proportions in, for example, care homes. It's not common. The overall numbers only a few hundred per year compared to 200, 300 or more thousand cases of pneumonia, but it is entirely preventable. So nobody needs to catch Legionella. The death rate, because this can kill you, is around about 1 in 8, at 12% in the general population, but in a particularly susceptible population like a care home or a hospital, it can be as high as 30%. Symptoms are pretty disagreeable. It's a pneumonia. It comes on like a serious dose of flu with coughing and chest pains and muscle pains and delirium and a high temperature, high fever, very often sickness and diarrhea. The symptoms are quite variable, and so's the outcome. Quite apart from those who die, those who survive sometimes are perfectly well afterwards, and sometimes they are severely disabled, up to and including brain damage. It's a very, very nasty disease. So how's it going to affect your business? Well, first of all, because it's rare, it's very newsworthy. Because it's preventable, it's seen as somebody's fault, so it's only ever going to be bad publicity, and for some reason people are more afraid of it than they are other things. More people die of asbestos-related disease, but people aren't afraid of asbestos. Tell them there's a possibility of Legionella in the system, and they will go mad. Now, because it is preventable, the powers that be, the Environmental Health Office and the Health and Safety Executive, take a view on it. If it's preventable, it should be prevented. And they will come in and they will say, look, you should have prevented this, you haven't, and they will take action. It could be as simple as a notification. It could be a statutory improvement notice, which is then logged on the land registry against your property. And it could be a prohibition notice. Stop doing something, maybe vacate the premises, and possibly a prosecution. Now, if somebody should die of Legionnaire's disease, it stops just being a matter of bad practice. It's a criminal act, and the police will get involved. because now it's quite clear the law has been broken. There are a number of laws affecting it. Principal one is the Health and Safety at Work Act, which says a duty holder, that's an employer, a self-employed person, or whoever is in control of the premises. Now you can see this is heading for the landlord and the letting agent. Those people must ensure that nobody is put at risk unless that risk is inevitable. So you've got this duty of care. The standard is the risk must be as low as reasonably practicable, but reasonably practicable isn't clearly defined. It comes down to what is practicable and what is a reasonable extent to apply that. Now all that's a bit complicated and rather difficult to fathom, and so there is an approved code of practice which goes with this. And the approved code of practice is like a highway code. It explains and adds rules. So it tells you, this is what the law says, you must do this, and to do that, you should really do it like so. And you can look in the highway code and see in the highway code, you must do this, you should do that. This is very, very similar. So this approved code of practice says, this is what the law says. And the law says, don't put anybody at risk. That's the Health and Safety at Work Act. The Control of Substances Hazardous Health regulations, which exist under the Health and Safety at Work Act, tell you how. They say assess the risk. So it's very dangerous, but how dangerous? It could kill you. Will it? Is it likely to? Now that's your risk assessment. And if the answer is no, it won't because everything's fine, well, so be it. Well and good. But the answer is almost always something could be improved. Now, could be improved quickly becomes should be improved. So how do you prevent? How do you control? What do you put in place? Now, eradication is very, very difficult once it's in there, and any seed is liable to grow into a significant amount. So all the time you're battling against the tide to maintain the level of risk as low as is reasonably practicable. Now that's a highly specialised thing. So you've got the Management of Health and Safety Work regulations which recognise that not everybody is a specialist in this, and if you need to do this, which you do, you need specialist help or specialist training. It's no different having a gas safety check carried out. You get a gas safety engineer, plumber who's qualified to do that. If you need to control the water hygiene, you get somebody who knows about water hygiene to advise you, to carry out the risk assessment and to advise you. It isn't any different. Another thing which is mentioned in the approved code of practice is the notification of cooling towers and evaporative condensers regulations, which is a pretty rare requirement in the domestic property sector. It's usually on commercial buildings, but if you have one, you have to notify the local authority if you've got one, and if you take it out, you've got to notify them that you've taken it out. Now, you may recall some years ago there were a number of disasters where dozens or hundreds of people were killed, and nobody got prosecuted for those deaths. We remember the Herald of Free Enterprise capsized back in, I think that was 1986, and the train crashes. This was because nobody made any decisions to do something one way or another, but companies were carrying out policies. And so the Corporate Manslaughter and Corporate Homicide Act of 2007 was introduced, and there's an equivalent in Scotland which is more or less the same, just slightly worded slightly differently. And that places a responsibility on, or it places a duty on companies and the company directors. So in much the same way as if a company trades unlawfully and dishonestly, the directors are held responsible. So if it is is guilty of a gross dereliction of duty, the directors themselves are responsible, and the directors themselves can be prosecuted. The Safety Representatives and Safety Committees regulations and the Consultation with Employees regulations make it a requirement that matters of health and safety are disseminated to employees. So the employees must be told, and the employer must tell them of any risks in their workplace. And the Report of Injuries, Diseases and Dangerous Occurrence regulations mean that if somebody catches Legionnaire's disease in any way associated with work, the Health and Safety Executive needs to be informed. So, who is it that is responsible? Well, the duty holder is the employer, the self-employed person or the person in control of premises. Now sometimes who is responsible, who is the person in control of premises, is not that straightforward. It can be a little bit vague, depends on the terms of the lease. But in the absence of anything to the contrary, to clarify it, it defaults to the landlord. So the duty holder has to identify risks, he has to have a risk assessment carried out, and he has to come up with a scheme for preventing or controlling the risk. That's just a wish list. So he then has to implement it. He has to make sure, because remember there is ensure in the Act, he must monitor and manage. He must keep records to show that he's done that. He's got to put somebody who is competent, an appointed competent person, in place to make it all happen. And that person has to have competence to know what he's doing, authority and knowledge, and he needs to confirm that everything is done in a timely and proportionate, correct way. That, of course, requires training. That requires somebody to know what they're talking about and to apply that. Now, there's a difference between training and competence. Training is the provision of information. Competence is the judged, the sensible, the rational, the reasoned application of that. So you can teach somebody how to do something. Whether they actually use their heads and do it properly is the difference between training and competence. And the law requires competence because it requires the duty holder to ensure that everything that can reasonably be done has been done. Now, I'm not here to sell the Water Management Trust Society's training courses, but the Water Management Society is a not-for-profit organisation, and we have City and Guilds accreditation for our training courses, which can provide that training element. So here on the screen you will see the details of our website and how you can gain access to that. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope we will speak again. Goodbye.